Well, welcome everyone. We'll wait a few more minutes for others to join. All right, why don't we get started? Welcome everyone. This is the Q&A session for new project proposals for the CoC NOFO competition. I'm Chris Smock, an independent consultant working with Washington County to coordinate their CoC application. But why don't we start with introductions, and I think we have a small enough group we can all introduce ourselves. So if you could introduce yourself and your organization, and then pass the baton to someone else. And let's start with Catherine.
Good morning, everyone. Catherine Gallion, Washington County Department of Housing Services, so a program manager in the Department of Homeless Services.
Elise?
Elise Laubach, Family Promise of Tualatin Valley, Fund Development Manager. I pass it to Brandy.
Hi, I'm Brandy Penner, she, her. I'm the Program Manager of Elder Pride Services at Friendly House. I'll pass it to Larry.
Morning, everyone. Larry Health, Program Manager at Community Action, he, him pronouns.
Chelsea?
Hey there, my internet connection is kind of spotty, so that's why I have my camera off. I apologize, but my name's Chelsea. I'm the Director of Operations for Safety Compass.
And John?
Hi, apologies, I have the same issue. My name is John McPherson. I work for Open Door Housing Works as the grant writer.
Great, thank you everyone for being here. So our plan for today is I'm going to do a brief overview of the funding opportunity, and then we'll just open it up for questions and discussion. So it's probably easier if you wait until I'm done with the presentation to ask questions, because I may answer your questions as I go along. But if there's something pressing when I'm on a particular slide, feel free to jump in and ask the question at that point. Any questions from anybody before I share my screen and dive in? All right. Okay, so just to get everyone on the same page, the funding opportunity that we're here to talk about is the Continuum of Care, or CoC Program Competition. It's a federal grant competition administered by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. And Washington County Department of Housing Services is what's called the Collaborative Applicant for the local Continuum of Care. So HUD divides communities across the country into what it calls continuums of care. And then there's one entity for each continuum of care that's responsible for coordinating the application for that continuum. So that includes an extensive application that covers everything that's happening in the continuum, in this case in Washington County. And then it also includes all the project applications that are submitted from that community. So HUD released the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, for the 2024 funding competition on July 31st. And Washington County is eligible to apply for about $5 million in annual renewal funding, plus compete for potential new project funding. So just to give you a little more information, if you're not familiar with this funding source. So these are the current projects in Washington County that are funded through the CoC program. So each of these projects will be submitting a renewal application to renew the funding that they're currently receiving. And so that's one of the nice things about this funding source, that it is there is the potential to renew the funding each year, but you do need to reapply and qualify for that each year. So, but we're going to focus on new projects. So the grant competition process for new projects has two components. One is the local competition. So we're asking new project applicants to submit a written proposal using a form that we've created for the local competition. And then those proposals are scored based on criteria that we have developed locally. So those criteria reflect HUD's criteria as well as priorities that we've identified in Washington County. And then one or more proposals will be selected for submission to HUD. So there's a funding limit for how much funding we can submit proposals for. So the number of proposals that are selected is based on how many proposals we get and what their proposed budgets are, and how many then can fit under that funding cap that we're allowed to submit under. So the proposals that get submitted for submission to HUD then make their way to the national competition. So HUD awards new project funding to CoCs based primarily on the CoC's overall consolidated application score. So you could put together an amazing proposal, and HUD is not going to spend a lot of time or a lot of points focusing on how amazing your proposal is. The chances of your proposal getting funded are largely based on how we score as a community as a whole. And there are lots of things that go into that score. And there's some things that we do really well on, and some things that we don't have as much control over, that we don't do as well on in comparison to some other communities in the country. And then, so this is all to say funding of any new projects is not guaranteed. So even if you make it through the local competition and your proposal is submitted to HUD, we have no guarantee that it will be funded. Last year, we did not have our new project proposal funded. The previous year we did. The year prior to that, we did not. So it's a little hard to predict. HUD announces funding decisions sometime in kind of winter, spring of 2025. And then the grant terms that you would be applying for begin in mid to late 2025. So the key dates for the process for the local competition are that the local competition proposals are due on September 4th. And then the review committee will review those proposals. If they have clarifying questions, there'll be a window of time between September 16th and 19th where we will submit any clarifying questions to applicants by email, and you'll need to respond to those questions by the 19th. And we're trying to make sure that those are really just going to be clarifying questions. We're not going to be asking you to develop new proposal content, but just to clarify anything that's not clear. So by October 10th, hopefully sooner, but this would be our latest date, we'll notify applicants if their proposals are selected for submission to HUD. And then sometime in the window of October, like first 3 weeks of October, we'll be working with the highest scoring applicants to complete the HUD application. So a lot of the information that you would submit for the local application can go directly into the HUD application, but there's additional information that we'll need to put together for that application, and we provide support with that process. So we have funding available for new projects in two categories. The main category is called the CoC bonus. We're eligible for an estimated $598,000. So HUD has not released the final amounts yet. This estimate is very likely to be that amount for the CoC bonus, but we'll know for sure in about a week. And under this category, projects can come in under two different project types: permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing. The second category is the DV bonus. we're eligible to apply up to an estimated $360,000. That amount also has not been finalized, and the final number may be a little bit different than that. And again, we'll hopefully know by next week, but it's in that ballpark. And so any projects coming under the DV bonus have to be projects serving survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. And they are limited to being rapid rehousing projects. The DV bonus has some additional requirements for projects that are applying under that category. So we're encouraging any applicants that are considering applying under the DV bonus to get in touch with us so that we can go over those additional requirements. And feel free also, if any of you are considering that, you can also ask questions about that during this session. So projects need to align with HUD's definitions for permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing. So for permanent supportive housing for this competition, it's defined as housing in which housing assistance, which would be long-term leasing or rental assistance, and supportive services are provided to assist households that have at least one member with a disability in achieving housing stability. And the eligible population is either persons experiencing chronic homelessness based on HUD's definition, or persons meeting eligibility criteria for dedicated plus projects. And that's a kind of a complicated category that is defined in the HUD NOFO. And if anyone is searching for that information, I can direct you to where you can find that definition. But it's a sort of slightly broader category that basically is also focused on chronic homelessness. Rapid rehousing is permanent housing that provides short-term, up to 3 months, and or medium-term, 4 to 24 months of tenant-based rental assistance and supportive services to households experiencing homelessness. And the eligible population is persons experiencing unsheltered or sheltered homelessness, persons at imminent risk of homelessness, or persons fleeing domestic violence at risk of homelessness. So HUD also awards bonus points that get applied to our overall CoC score, which increases the chances that we would be awarded funding for new projects. So we also, in the scoring for the local competition, we assign bonus points for projects that meet these criteria, because those projects are going to just help our overall chances of getting awarded funding. So there's 2 ways that you could achieve these bonus points, and you can also double the bonus points by achieving both of these. So they're related to leverage. So the first one is under healthcare. If there's a written commitment from a healthcare organization to provide access to treatment or recovery services for all program participants who qualify, or healthcare services to program participants equal to at least 25% of the funding being requested for the project. And that can be behavioral health or medical care, any kind of healthcare services. And then the second category is under housing. So if the project includes housing subsidies that are not funded through this federal CoC program or the federal ESG program, and those housing subsidies are included in the project, and they're available for at least 25% of the units or participants in the project, then that would also be eligible. And again, there would need to be a formal written commitment for those. And then we have some additional local funding priorities based on the work plan and priorities that have been developed by the Solutions Council, which serves as our CoC board. So funding is prioritized for projects that increase Washington County system capacity for permanent supportive housing and or rapid rehousing, and support permanent housing placement and retention. And then additional points in the scoring for the local competition will be awarded to projects that support shelter participants to transition to permanent housing as quickly as possible, reducing the length of time that people experience homelessness, and or are specifically focused on helping people transition from unsheltered homelessness to permanent housing, and or address and resolve disparities for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in housing program outcomes. So the funding uses for this program, eligible funding uses include leasing, operating costs, rental assistance, and supportive services. HUD does allow applications under this program for capital costs, but we're not allowing those under our local competition. There's actually a separate funding competition this year for capital costs for PSH, and we'll be putting more information out about that soon. Based on our experience with this program over the years, we encourage applicants to focus their funding requests on leasing and rental assistance costs rather than supportive services and operating costs. And that's because HUD adjusts the amount that they award in the annual renewal competition for leasing and rental assistance costs based on changes in those costs. But up until this year, they are actually going to start making some adjustments to operating and supportive services costs. But in general, those awards have remained flat over time. And so they basically just do not adequately fund the projects over time. So Washington County will work with applicants to fund supportive services if needed, in addition to the resources the applicant is committing to the project, so that you can really focus your application on the housing side of the funding. And then HUD also allows administrative costs up to 10% of the project grant. And there are other requirements. So eligible applicants for this funding are nonprofits, government entities, or faith-based organizations. Individuals and for-profits are not eligible. You have to provide matching funds, both in your new project application as well as every year's renewal application, that are equal to at least 25% of the requested budget. And projects are required to participate in the local homeless management information system and coordinated entry systems. And projects must take a housing first approach. It's also important to be aware of what comes with accepting money from HUD. You are required to adhere to all HUD funding rules, restrictions, and limitations. To comply with HUD grant management, record keeping, financial management, and administrative requirements. There are requirements for ongoing data entry and reporting in HMIS. There are requirements for annual monitoring and performance evaluation. And you have to participate in the annual renewal funding application process. So of the various funding sources that are available to our community for homeless services, this is sort of probably the most high maintenance funding source. So it's not a good fit for every organization. All right. So I'm going to just, if anyone wants me to reopen a slide, I'm happy to do that. But I'm just going to open it up for Q&A and discussion at this point. I think we're a small enough group, you could probably just jump in, but also feel free to use the hand raising feature as well, if you're more comfortable with that. Questions?
Yeah,
John.
so I'm wondering, first, would you be able to share those slides with us?
Yes, so we'll make sure if you registered, and I assume you all registered in order to be able to get a link. So we'll make sure to email out the slide deck to everyone who registered.
Perfect. And I actually would like to hear more about the eligibility requirements for the DV portion of the funding.
Yeah, so so the additional requirements that I referenced, I mean, some of it is related to eligibility, but it also, what we really want to make sure people are aware of is the additional application requirements for that. So in general, the key eligibility requirement is those applications need to be from organizations that are serving people experiencing DV. And that all of the funding has to go to people who meet the criteria that HUD has established for people experiencing homelessness who are affected by DV. But the DV bonus, so there's an entire section of the application, the CoC's overall application, that is dedicated to the DV bonus application. And so if you are applying for DV bonus funds, you would submit a new project application, and you'd have to work with us to develop that separate application that goes in for the DV bonus. It includes about 20 questions, including some fairly lengthy narrative and data questions. There are some additional requirements around things like demonstrating your experience and success at working with this population, and meeting. HUD has a whole bunch of criteria for the type of services and the way that you're providing services for that population. And so those narrative questions focus on demonstrating that you have experience doing that, that you have experience with housing, placing and retaining the population in housing, and then questions about engaging participants in planning and policymaking for this project and for your program. So it's a range of questions that extend beyond the more basic questions that are part of the new project application for any new projects. And the way that HUD scores the DV bonus is different than for the other new projects. So it's the DV bonus applications are all pulled out and compared to one another nationally, and HUD has a certain pool of funding available for the DV bonus, so they compare those applications to one another to make a decision about which projects get DV bonus funds. And the scoring for that is based, like 50% of that is, I think, based on the overall CoC application score. But a chunk of it is based also on how we've responded as a community to a series of questions related to DV in our consolidated application, and then based on that additional supplemental application. So happy to provide more information or to meet with folks who are really wanting to dig in on the details on that. But yeah, I just want people to be aware there's just a little bit of a heavier lift in terms of the application for those funds, and you just need to kind of anticipate that. Brandy.
Thanks, Chris. This is all really good information and a super complicated system. My question, we are currently providing residential services at the first in the state, LGBTQ+ older adult affordable housing. I'm thinking this fund could be helpful for the operating and supportive services that we're trying to cover. I heard your take on the rental support piece of it, that's a really important part of it. And so I'm kind of wondering about the longevity of the fund, right? Like as a new project, we could potentially offer rental assistance to our residents here, or we could also partner with organizations in the county to offer rental assistance to, say, specifically like LGBTQ+ populations, right? So I'm wondering about, is this like, I would hate to offer residents rental support if it was only, say, for a year. Like, what is the longevity of the funds? Is it an application process, every year we're kind of like, maybe we'll get it, maybe we won't, or kind of once you're in, you have to sort of keep up the reporting and keep going, but you are kind of assured that you may continue to get funds?
Yeah, so I mean, the way that it's worked in the past, and federal government could always make some sort of dramatic change in the future, is that so if you are awarded funds, then you become, so part of what happens is if we as a community, put forward a new project proposal and it's awarded funds, that funding gets added to the amount that we're eligible to reapply for every year. So it sort of increases our pot. And then the way that HUD structures it is they, on the one hand, understand the importance of, if somebody's in permanent housing or getting rental assistance, not taking that away, but they're required by Congress to make this a competitive competition. And so the way they try and address that is that they every year set a certain percentage. So the overall pot of what we were awarded the previous year, a certain percentage of that were almost guaranteed to be eligible for renewal. So this year it's 90%. So that means of all the projects that are funded, the way we have to address that in our application is we go through a process of looking at the performance of the projects that were funded. There's a scoring process. Based on those scores, those projects are ranked. So the projects at the very end, like bottom of the rankings that are kind of in that bottom 10%, their funding is not guaranteed. It's at risk. HUD has generally funded those projects for renewal. But so there's like a little bit of risk there for projects that are at the bottom of the list. But in general, we've been able to get renewal funding every year, and it is set up as a renewal, as an annual renewal process. And so, you know, there's a good chance that the funding will continue year after year. It's not guaranteed, but it's in some ways probably a better guarantee than many other funding sources that you might use. Other questions? Elise?
Yeah, I had a clarifying question. If I understood correctly, extra points are awarded for moving people through shelter into permanent housing. And but then also we are using the coordinated system. So I was wondering if there's a way to be able to prioritize the folks that are in shelter to move through the system faster. Is there any possibility there?
Catherine, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Great question, Larry. And it's a little bit of a different conversation that involves our prioritization criteria that the Solutions Council, as the CoC board now has oversight of. So for the purposes of this application, it would be just including in your program design and an interaction with shelter providers and shelter participants, or establishing an eligibility criteria for your program, which is also allowed.
Great, thanks.
Elise?
I have a couple of questions. One, I read through the materials, but didn't find something that had the list of questions. When I click on the link, it's a platform that you seem to have to click through. Have I missed something that would give me a preview of all of the questions in the application?
Oh, for the local application?
Yes.
I tried to set it up this year so that you can click through and
you can click through without answering it?
Without answering it.
Okay, perfect. I didn't try that yet, but yeah, sometimes that when it's set up so that you have to answer as you go is really hard to plan and to.
Yes, well,
Okay.
I did that last year, and I was like, oh, this is the problem. So if you encounter any problems, and I'm going to put my email address in the chat for folks, if you encounter any problems doing that, or if the system doesn't allow you to download it as a PDF, just let me know and I can do that and email it out. But yes, I was hoping to make it possible for you to just preview everything before you have to do any answering.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, was question one. Question two, the match requirement, you mentioned something and then I see something that's has more detail in this document. It says all new project proposals must demonstrate a match of 25% of all proposed grant funds other than leasing funds. So what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so leasing funds are different in the budget than rental assistance funds. So
yeah,
so
we don't do master leases, so that wouldn't apply to us necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And so for whatever reason, HUD eliminates that. So like we have a renewal project that has leasing funds. So the calculation for the required match is the total budget minus the leasing funds times 0.25. But if you don't have leasing funds, it's just a straight 25% of your budget. It has to be in match, and that can be in kind or funding from some other source.
Okay. All right, and then another question about the bonus points for healthcare services equal to 25% of the funding request. How is that monetized? How is that defined? If you partner with a service provider, are they meant to provide some sort of budget for the estimate of cost of their services?
Yeah, if it's in kind and they're providing in kind services, they have to use some sort of some system for, yes, monetizing the value of those services, and then have to provide a letter on letterhead saying that they're committing to provide, you know, services to X number of participants, or however they're framing the commitment, and that those services are worth X amount of money. And then HUD makes sure that that amount is, you know, it is the you know, meets the criteria in terms of the overall budget asked for that project.
Okay. All right. And then in terms of, again, this 25% match, as you're encouraging organizations to not use this funding for the services component, and yet services are a requirement. If you have this services funded elsewise, could that be the 25% match?
Yeah, that's a great way of meeting your match.
Okay.
And then, yeah, what you would need to do for each year is to provide a letter just saying, like, you know, here are the sources and amounts of our match. You know, this is coming from, you know, so we have supportive services funding from this foundation in this amount. You know, we're committing to dedicate that to this project. So you need to be specific about what it is and where it's coming from. But yeah, that's a good way of meeting your match. And I should say, the bonus funds that we were just talking about, the healthcare or housing bonus funds, like those also would count as your match if you were trying to get those bonus points. That can just immediately just sort of also be counted as your match.
Okay, and one last question before I'll let Michael take over. Rapid rehousing is defined in different ways. I have this lovely document, ESG versus CoC rapid rehousing, that I haven't read yet. But one question I had is that in Washington County, when we're working with rapid rehousing, it's not even necessarily folks in shelter. Would this be a combination, because they talked about moving through shelter quickly, or would it always be pointed at people who are already in a shelter system?
Catherine, do you want to take that?
Are you asking about the additional points for focusing on households that are currently in the shelter system?
Right, because the SHS rapid rehousing often frequently focuses and entirely focuses on folks who are not in shelter and getting them housed without having to go through the shelter system. I'm just wondering if this is a combination thereof, and why one would be penalized for taking someone directly into housing and not having them have to go through shelter.
There would be no penalty. So unsheltered there is a bonus in the application for multiple things, including one item, which is to assist households in exiting shelter with rapid rehousing.
Okay.
I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I'm not sure I'm fully understanding what you're getting at.
I think I'm just wondering if it needs to be focused on people in shelter, or especially in terms of how then and I assume this is a way later down the road thing, but when we're getting referrals to Community Connect, you know, is one of the criteria you're in shelter, or would one of the criteria be you're experiencing homelessness somewhere? And would it matter to be able to access this kind of funding and support?
I think this kind of goes back to Larry's question earlier, is how would that work in combination with coordinated entry? And it would be, you could set that as a eligibility criteria for your program.
Okay, that answers it. Thank you.
Great, sure.
Michael?
If we already have a renewal process out with the CoC, are we able to expand our services and or do something different with this current one? Or if someone's already got a contract out and we've done the renewal, is that all we can do?
So you can apply for new project funding that would be like an expansion project of your current. project, you would submit 2 applications, your regular renewal application and then the new project application. And in that application, you would sort of connect that application back to your renewal project by entering the grant number and the name of that project. What you would have to do is show that the request for new funding is going to increase the number of people you're serving. And so, you know, as long as I think, you know, the way HUD would award it is if the renewal project is listed in that top 90% of scoring renewal projects, the renewal project would get funding. And then if the new project proposal also gets awarded funding, it would be more competitive because it's the new project funding. If that also gets awarded funding, then the grant award could be like a combined grant, you know, sort of brought together as an expansion project. But you sort of approach it like you're applying for new funding.
Okay, and great. And so that means if we don't get the new funding, it means we'll still be able to get the renewal as well too. Okay.
Yeah, it
Just
doesn't
making sure.
jeopardize the renewal at all.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Elise.
Yeah, I thought of one more. How are we defining expanding services? So Family Promise of Tualatin Valley already does some of these things. We have funding through various sources. You know, you know how funding goes. It's hard to project what our capacity will be in 25, 26. It may be replacing funding that we have currently that we may not have renewed for that. So how is it the county defining expansion of services?
And you're talking again at that, like the local priorities?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I guess one thing I'll say, because these are really good questions, is like those priorities are kind of, they're broad, right? They're described as priorities, like here's as a community what we want to be doing. I don't think there's like a really specific, like, and this is what it means to do this. And so the local application, which is where you'd be scored for that, has a question that sort of says, you know, speak to, I mean, there are questions just about like describing your project. And so if you think your project, you know, helps to move forward any of those local priorities, make your best case for why that is. And then the review committee is that they are being told, like, here are the local priorities. If the project you know, moves forward these local priorities, assign it additional points. So yeah, it's really, you know, you can make your best case for how this is achieving that.
Fair. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The other questions? Wow, we've answered the questions. If anyone is thinking about the DV bonus, if you could maybe indicate that now, or maybe put your email address in the chat. So I have like a 1-pager I've put together that has a little more information on the DV bonus requirements. And so I can send that to you, and then you know, happy to answer questions over email or meet with you separately, just to like make sure you have a good understanding of what it would mean to submit that application. Part of what makes it more complicated is that, I mean, for the first step, the local competition, we're just asking you to fill out the same form that any new project applicants are filling out. But I want to, you know, give you access to the questions you would need to be thinking about and able to respond to in order to be competitive for the DV bonus competition. So, so thank you, Elise and Chelsea, and I'll send you that 1-pager, and yeah, let me know if there's additional information that would be helpful.
Thank you, Chris. This has been very helpful.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone for your interest. I don't want to put you on the spot, Larry, and there are others here too, but any of you who currently or previously have received HUD CoC funding, anything you can offer to folks in terms of like your advice, like this is a great funding source, it's so renewable, or this is like the biggest nightmare and don't get involved, or anything in between. But I think it's useful for people to get a sense for what it would mean to diving into this arena with HUD.
I would just say that it's a really good source of funding. One of the main things that I appreciate about it is that there's a lot of support from Washington County to help it be successful, to get the services to the people who need them. So I just appreciate the relationship with the county that really makes it successful.
I don't know if anyone else here has experience with CoC funding. Anything you want to add to that, Catherine?
Yeah, I think the biggest, most common challenge that most providers face, and thank you for that, Larry. That's nice to hear. We try hard to make sure we're providing enough support. One of the biggest challenges that's consistent across all providers is just that these funds are a big factor in kind of monitoring the outcomes is spend down. So full expenditure, which can be really challenging when there are periods of staff turnover. And so it's in order for these programs to be really successful, it takes a lot of flexibility and maneuvering, and sometimes you're over enrolling and sometimes you're under enrolling in order to hit those expenditure targets. And so it's just something to be aware of, that it doesn't function very well as a standalone program within an organization, just because it needs a lot of give. And also, you have to be able to manage CFR 200 financial reporting and monitoring. And yes, everybody loves it. And HUD does come to visit, and when they come to audit us, audit Washington County, they also pick a friend of ours to also audit.
Thanks, Catherine.
Sure.
All right. If there are no additional questions, we'll let people go, and look forward to hopefully getting some applications from all of you in the local competition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.